and welcome to this Meet the Miniaturist special open studio event. I am really super excited to bring on my guest in a second, but just to set the stage here, this is all about dropping in on some of my favorite artists who will be at the Tom Bishop Show, which is happening soon in April, starting the weekend of April 25th. So we just want to drop in on their studio spaces, get an idea of what they're up to, maybe learn a little bit about them, and maybe get a little bit of a sneak peek on some of the items and miniatures that they're going to be bringing to the show. So with that, I would like to say hello to Chris Toledo from Chris Toledo Miniatures. Now,
Hello.
we go back a little bit, I would say,
Yeah.
but I'm such a super fan. I just think your work is
Oh,
so
thank you.
incredible. And if you guys at home do not know who Chris is already, I'm so glad to be introducing you. If you do know him already, you're going to get to chat with, we're going to get to hear from him today. So with that, so tell us about yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do, what kind of miniatures you make, and then maybe we'll get a sneak peek.
Yeah. So I mean, I've been a lover of miniatures since, as far as my memory goes back. I think when I was like 9 or 10 was when I first actually came across the world of miniatures. I came across this nutshell news magazine in a dentist's office, and like I was just flipping through it, like, what is this? This is like the coolest thing I've ever seen. Because at that point in my life, any miniature or dollhouse thing that I'd ever kind of come across was, like pink plastic Barbie dream house, and this was different. Like there was so much craftsmanship that was involved in this, and my dad was actually a woodworker, so that having that kind of background already kind of like instantly sparked like, oh wow, like this is really cool. And even my dad, who was the woodworker, he like saw this and he was like mind blown, like just amazed at all the intricacy and the details of all these small pieces. And that kind of started the love affair. And as I got older, I started building little doll houses. I started with kits, and then I started kind of progressing into doing my own kind of little rooms. And yeah, and then in 2016, after a couple years of just dealing with life, I kind of rekindled that love of miniatures. And I was like, I out of all the things that I've ever done in the art world, like miniatures has always been my favorite because it combines all my favorite mediums. It's woodworking, it's painting, it's sculpting, it's knowledge of history, you know what I mean? And like, so all those things that I love so much, I realized that like miniatures kind of encompasses all of that. And so, it just kind of started as a hobby. And I started, I turned my guest room into a little corner of my guest room into my little
Yeah.
studio space. And I would kind of make little things here and there. And then that just kind of progressed more and more. And I started, posting on social media, and that just kind of like made me realize like, oh, maybe this is what I really, should be doing. Because,
Yeah.
out of all the things that I've ever done, I think like nothing's ever made me as happy as miniatures. And
Yeah.
so,
So
and so,
cute.
yeah, it just kind of started this like crazy love affair that, kind of led us to where we are now.
Yeah. Well, I think you just hit the nail on the head right there, which you're doing what makes you happy now. That is so key. So, can we take a step back? You do have an art background, and you were involved in a more traditional corporate role, I want to say, or at least the business world. Talk a little
Yeah,
bit
yeah.
about
So I've always like ever since I was a kid, I always knew that whatever I do end up being, I want, as an adult, I wanted it to be something art involved, something that I could be creative with, and that led me down so many different paths. And so like literally right out of high school, I went straight to start becoming an architect, because that was just something that I loved architecture. I loved, all that aspect, the design, and then, coming from a woodworking background, like that kind of just sparked that love. And so I started going to school for that. And then about 2 years into it, I was like, as much as I love this, I started to realize that being an architect, like I wasn't gonna have the creative freedom that I would, in like another art medium, And so that kind of got me thinking. I was like, unless you're like a super, famous architect, you really don't get to like super go out with your
that.
creativity. You know what I mean? Like you're kind of working for a firm, you're working under architects, other architects, and and I was like, that's not like the realm that I kind of want to be. Like I need to express myself, and so from that I went straight into fashion,
Oh,
and so I went to school, and I got my degree in product development in the fashion world, and I actually worked in that world for like 10 years, doing different things. Like I was assisting a lot of designers. I was, working with different, like fashion shows, and it was great. It was fun, you know, and but that still kind of like left me wanting more
Yeah.
creatively.
Yeah.
And so that kind of led me to photography. And so I started doing a lot of photography and like fashion photography and editorial work. And so I started doing that. And then that kind of got a little like, you know, because here in LA, you know, everybody's a photographer here. And so it was just, I didn't like the competition. I didn't like, you know, I wanted something that was more like, I don't know, just something that I'd be working with like more better quality, like people, I guess I
Yeah.
would say.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like it was just too cutthroat, and that's not the person that I am. And
Yeah.
so and so right around that time was kind of when I started getting into miniatures again as a hobby. And you know, and I was still doing photography and graphic design. And then you know, as the miniatures thing started to pick up, and then it kind of got to a point where I was like, I don't want to do any. I just want to focus on miniatures. You know,
Yeah.
and that was about 2016 when I was like, this is you know what I want to do.
All right. I want to, all those disciplines, photography, fashion, architecture, those are really strong creative disciplines. But I think probably the biggest piece of that has got to be your experience in architecture and your love of architecture.
Yeah.
Talk about how that sort of influences your whole vibe right now in terms of what you make in miniature.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, and I feel like that's what I'm doing now with miniatures is what I wanted from being an architect. Like I wanted to be able to get inspired by something and then recreate it or, you know, come up with my own designs and build that, you know, and have like a tangible thing that I've made, you know. And that's one thing that I was realizing that I wasn't gonna be able to get from the architecture world, you know, because I love architecture so much. Like I love the history of it, the evolution of it, you know, the rise and falls of different styles. And you know, I realized that you know that is my original passion, and like to actually get what I want from that, I think miniatures was the best kind of realm to get into, you know. And like you know, even like the photography and the fashion stuff, I feel like there's elements that I picked up in those worlds that I bring into the miniature world as well.
Absolutely, totally. I mean, when I see your work, there's precision in terms of proportion and design and scale, but then you have your use of color and use of materials, and then how you promote your work. I mean, all of those pieces so work for you in so many ways.
Oh, thank you.
Clearly, the architectural element I'm drawn to, because that's what comes to life. When you see your work, it is clearly an architectural room box. It takes you to Thorn Room. It takes you to Eugene Cupjack. You know what I mean? I almost
Yeah,
think of you as like this
biggest inspirations.
modern. Yeah, for sure. So talk a little bit about the specific architectural styles that you are drawn to, because there are specific styles that come out in your work that you do really, really well. And talk like what are some of the passion styles that you love?
Yeah, yeah. And you know, I feel like as every artist, you know, we evolve, you know what I mean? And so I think that like lately there's been a little bit of like a shift in like where I've been going, but primarily my love of like you know, period of architecture has always been like the 1920s, 1930s. I love those periods of architecture because there's so many influences around that time, you know what I mean? Like you know, it was like the old Hollywood boom, especially here in Los Angeles where I live. And so there was a lot of these, you know, celebrities and, you know, directors and people that were involved in the film world that just came into all this money at that period of time. And, you know, they were really influenced by European architecture because, you know, they were traveling to Europe and seeing all these beautiful castles and, you know, palaces and chateaus. And they would come back here to Los Angeles and they're like, I want to, you know, create something for myself that invokes, you know, all these different aspects of architecture that we love. And so that's when you see a lot of like the big revival movements like Tudor revival, Mediterranean revival, Spanish revival, you know. And you know, growing up here in Los Angeles, I was always around all those different types of architecture, so that's where I pulled like you know, so much of my inspiration. That's, you know, where my love of preservation of that period of architecture comes from. And you know, so that's kind of what started like my real love for what, you know, my pieces that I do. And so that's kind of been like my biggest like bubble that I've been in for the last couple of years. Like I love 1920s, like vintage bathrooms. I mean, that's, you know, kind of been like one of my biggest things that I like to make.
Yes.
And so I love all that. And then like within the last year, I've been kind of like, I did in like between 2013 and 2016, I traveled to Europe a few times, and I started getting really inspired by those periods of architecture, like the craftsmanship, the details, like, the gaucheness of all of it. And I loved it. And so I think, you'll see this year at Chicago, there's actually like, there's a little bit of a shift starting to happen, and I still got my bathrooms, I had to still do that because, like, I love bathrooms.
Yeah, you're sort of
But
iconic. That's iconic work for sure. But I do feel like some of these new pieces that are coming from you are like this new, new iconic pieces for you, this grandeur, these architectural elements everywhere. I had
yeah.
seen a few years ago, you might have done a commission. I'm going to probably pull this in and show it, but you did a commission piece that
Yeah.
was outside your scope at the time, but do you feel like that's actually what is now evolving into, or what you're
Yeah, oh
doing?
yeah, 100%. Yeah. And that project I had teamed up with artist June Cleanscales, who's
Yeah.
another amazing artist. And we did this amazing commission where, I did the rooms and then she would furnish and accessorize it. And then so it was an amazing collaboration, and like I love working with her. And that project kind of like planted the seed, I think, because it was already so far out of my style. But working with June, I was really inspired by her style. You know what I mean? And so that kind of planted that seed. And then I think last year in Chicago, like I started to that's when I started to get the bug, because I think last year I had like almost all bathrooms on display, and I was like, I feel like I kind of like. I'm just like starting to, I'm not gonna say getting tired of bathrooms, but I feel like just starting to like want to try something else. You know what I mean? I feel like I can't be making bathrooms all my life.
Yeah.
So
And I tell folks all the time, if you like an artist and you like what they're doing and you see something you like, get it now, because that artist might move on and they have every right to move on. You want to create what you want to create, and and that comes out in your work. So you don't want to be, churning out. So what I tell people is get it now if you like it, because you're moving on clearly. So let's talk about some of the things that we might see this year versus what we
yeah.
might have seen in the past.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the biggest things that I wanted to do is kind of create a different like variety of tub pieces, of what I was working, and so that still includes some bathrooms, but I wanted to do something more grand. I feel like a lot of the rooms that I was creating are a little bit smaller, and so I wanted to do something that kind of like started to showcase a little bit more scale. And so yeah, so that kind of got me started with like these three pieces that are back here. This top piece right here is something that I kind of put together. I just, after going to Chicago a couple times, I see so many artists that make some really beautiful dolls, and so I kind of got this idea of doing this really like intimate room that kind of has a really like heavy architectural elements to it, but also is perfect for displaying like a beautiful piece of artwork, a doll, and like just something that's like very just like a very like specific little display box, and so that's kind of what inspired that top room. And then the middle room,
Wait, can I stop on that? So I think that is brilliant, because that allows somebody who might not have the space for something big, might not have the budget for something bigger, but allows them to get all of the preciousness of your work in a smaller scale. I'm assuming it'll be less, more affordable. So I
yeah.
think that is a great thing. That it's almost like this is a great thing you're doing for your customer, because you don't always get a chance to have a piece of that artist.
Yeah.
So I think that's fantastic. Sorry. Okay, go on to the next.
Yeah. No, of course. Yeah, and that's why. So I wanted to kind of create three different sizes as far as these more intricate, detailed rooms. And then I was also very inspired by like the Tudor period and the Jacobean period. That little transition between those two eras. And so I really love like all the woodwork. So I was really inspired by a lot of architecture from that period. Things that you would see at like Windsor Castle. And so I wanted to create like something that was like still kind of big, but but small enough that would easily fit on like a shelf or something. And so that kind of wanted me to create this middle room, which I really wanted to use a way to showcase like a lot of woodwork. Because I do love a lot of woodwork, and I feel like that's one thing that I wanted. Every year I try to bring at least one piece that showcases a lot of the woodwork, because like some pieces I do a lot of tile work, and so I kind of like try to keep a little bit of a balance between like the different things that I do.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah. All right. And then you have even a larger piece.
Yeah, and even a larger room. Yeah,
Even
yeah. So
larger. Wow.
Yeah. So this room, it's funny because like even though it's probably one of the largest rooms I've done of this, of this type of style, I feel like I like regret not going even bigger with it. Just because reading so much of like the style of architecture and the influences of that period, it's like kind of like 18th century, late 18th century, early 19th century. I was really inspired by like Holcombe Hall and in Norfolk, England, and that's actually there's one specific room that's like the red drawing room, and that's where I kind of pulled a lot of my inspiration for this room. And so I pulled a lot of different ideas from the ceilings and stuff. That room is red, but I wanted to kind of create something that was a little bit softer and a little bit more not so bright.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, for folks who are looking for room boxes, they don't come very often. There aren't that many makers like you out there. So it's like, again, it goes back to this: if you like it, get it while it's there. So I think this is awesome. So these are some of mine, clearly. So let's talk about some of the things that we might see this year versus what we
Yeah.
might have seen in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the biggest things that I wanted to do is kind of create a different like variety of tub pieces, of what I was working. And so that still includes some bathrooms, but I wanted to do something more grand. I feel like a lot of the rooms that I was creating are a little bit smaller, and so I wanted to do something that kind of like started to showcase a little bit more scale. And so yeah, so that kind of got me started with like these three pieces that are back here. This top piece right here is something that I kind of put together. I just, after going to Chicago a couple times, I see so many artists make some really beautiful dolls, and so I kind of got this idea of doing this really like intimate room that kind of has a really like heavy architectural elements to it, but also is perfect for displaying like a beautiful piece of artwork, a doll, and like just something that's like very just like a very like specific little display box, and so that's kind of what inspired that top room. And then the middle room,
Wait, can we
I
stop on that? So I think that is brilliant because that allows somebody who might not have the space for something big, might not have the budget for something bigger, but allows them to get all of the preciousness of your work in a smaller scale. I'm assuming it'll be less, more affordable. So I
yeah.
think that is a great thing. That it's almost like this is a great thing you're doing for your customer because you don't always get a chance to have a piece of that artist.
Yeah.
So I think that's fantastic. Sorry. Okay, go on to the next.
Yeah. No, of course. Yeah, and that's why. So I wanted to kind of create three different sizes as far as these more intricate, detailed rooms. And then I was also very inspired by like the Tudor period and the Jacobean period. That little transition between those two eras. And so I really love like all the woodwork. So I was really inspired by a lot of architecture from that period. Things that you would see at like Windsor Castle. And so I wanted to create like something that was like still kind of big, but but small enough that would easily fit on like a shelf or something. And so that kind of wanted me to create this middle room, which I really wanted to use a way to showcase like a lot of woodwork. Because I do love a lot of woodwork, and I feel like that's one thing that I wanted. Every year I try to bring at least one piece that showcases a lot of the woodwork. Because like some pieces I do a lot of tile work, and so I kind of like try to keep a little bit of a balance between like the different things that I do.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah. All right. And then you have an actual, even a larger piece.
Yeah, and even a larger room.
Yeah,
Yeah.
even
So
larger. Wow.
yeah. So this room, it's funny because like even though it's probably one of the largest rooms I've done of this type of style, I feel like I like regret not going even bigger with it. Just because reading so much of like the style of architecture and the influences of that period, it's like kind of like 18th century, late 18th century, early 19th century. I was really inspired by like Holcombe Hall and in Norfolk, England, and that's actually there's one specific room that's like the red drawing room, and that's where I kind of pulled a lot of my inspiration for this room. And so I pulled a lot of different ideas from the ceilings and stuff. That room is red, but I wanted to kind of create something that was a little bit softer and a little bit more not so bright.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, for folks who are looking for room boxes, they don't come they don't come very often. There aren't that many makers like you out there. So it's like, again, it goes back to this. If you like it, get it while it's there. So I think this is awesome. So these are clearly some of the pieces that we're going to see in Chicago. Fabulous. But we're
Yes.
also going to get to see your bathrooms. And I also know you also you are making individual pieces as well, because I know people can do their own room boxes and buy individual pieces from you, right?
Yeah, yeah. So this year I'm changing it up a little bit. I'm still
Yeah.
kind of toying around with what I'm gonna bring as far as like
Okay.
smaller pieces. Yeah, because
Yeah.
normally in the past I usually do like bathroom fixtures and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and like a
I
little
love
setup.
that.
And I still will have all that stuff available on my website and stuff.
Okay.
But this year I'm kind of like changing things up a little bit, and
Okay.
it's kind of you'll see. It's gonna be a little bit of a surprise. It's gonna be kind of things that are more indicative of like the styles that I'm getting more inspired by now. And like I say surprise mainly because like most of the stuff is still in pieces and in progress, so so
Right.
there's not much to share yet.
Yeah.
But I am excited about some of the stuff that I'm going to be bringing. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean like because of my love of architecture, like
Yeah.
I've always tried to be true to that, you know what I mean? And so most of the things that I do make are somewhat architecturally involved. And that's why I like doing the room boxes, because it's not just one thing, you're working on a bunch of different things. And and like I have so much admiration for the artists that like focus just on furniture and decoration items, you know what I mean? I'm like they are the masters of that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but
So
then
I
again, you can argue you have to have admiration for the artists who can do it all too. You're doing all, the woodwork, you're doing the design work, you're doing the painting, which gets me to my other question, which is talk a little bit about the materials you use and maybe some of the techniques. Because there is a
yeah.
lot that goes into these room boxes, a lot of skill.
Oh my gosh. I mean,
So,
it's so many different processes. I mean, that's why my studio looks the way that it does. Like, so I have like a station for everything. Yeah.
yes.
And I mean, and yeah, I mean, like, it really depends on like what the process is. I mean, anything that I'm doing with woodwork, I try to be really true to the process of the woodwork. So I'll mill all my own moldings and trims. I mean, you can see I literally have like most of these are leftovers from past projects, or sometimes I'll just make like a bunch of one style that I just like have a bunch on hand. And so I usually try to like stock up on as much as that. And so yeah, so the woodwork, I always, coming from that background from my dad, I try to be like really true to that. And so yeah, I mean, one of these rooms that I did this parquet floor, which all the pieces were hand cut, and I think it took about a month alone just to do that floor. Um, and so yeah, and then I'll combine different things. Like if I'm doing like more like plaster type work, I'll kind of combine a mixture of like cast pieces.
Mhm.
I recently started combining different things like wood and cast pieces, and then taking mold of that, and casting that. And then I think like the biggest thing on top of that is like the finishing thing is the painting. Like I feel like I'm a huge sucker for aging all my pieces. Like I love all my work to look like it's seen the test of time. Like I for some reason pieces that are like brand new and sparkly, they just don't feel like they have too much of a soul to me. Like I love something to look like it's been like lived in and has a life. And so that's probably like, out of all the processes that I do, that's probably my favorite, because I feel like that's what really
That's
gives,
yeah.
these pieces like an element, So this room, I like wallpapered the whole room, and it was
Wow.
beautiful. And I was like looking at it for like a week, and I was like, it's missing
Yeah.
something. And I was like, I think it's the wallpaper. It needs age, because I was looking at all these pictures of these like beautiful historic rooms that are, beautifully like damask paper, and I noticed that like it's uneven. Like some panels are a little bit darker, some are a little bit lighter, because it's just seen this passage of time. And
Yeah.
so just incorporating little things like that, I feel like it's really what kind of gives pieces that soul, that that shows that they're lived in and loved, and I think that it adds that to that realism.
I also think your faux finishing is beautiful too. Like your marbleizing is you do that work as well, right? Borders are hand
Yeah.
painted. I mean,
Oh yeah, yeah, and that's something that's also that I kind of started a little bit within the last couple years. I was always terrified of it, because I would see so many like faux marble work that the artists did, and I was like, what, like just blown. Like, how do they do that to make it look so realistic? And I think it was about 2 years ago, I had this project that I was commissioned by the National Museum of Toys and Miniatures in Kansas City. they commissioned me to do this insanely huge. I mean, I believe that the final measurement was 20 feet long, basically, a miniature museum. So there's like a main like lobby atrium with two wings on each side of gallery space, and I really wanted to do a lot of marble work. So I spent like weeks and weeks just like practicing different types of techniques and different sponging and with tiny brushes, trying to just get that marble look just right. And and even still then, like once I got the at least the pattern and the look of it right, like I
Yeah.
still didn't like how it looked. And I started figuring out like maybe I should try to incorporate like things that you would do with real marble. So so like once I finish my marble work, I'll give it like 10 coats of like a clear coat, and then once that's dry, I'll actually sand and buff it like you would, the same tools that you use to sand and buff real marble to get it to that. It's like it's not quite a super high gloss, but it's a very specific gloss that marble has. And so trying to figure out like how to recreate that, to add the final element.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so I tried to incorporate some of those marble elements into the pieces this year.
So, well, do you think you'll ever teach, or do you teach? Have you taught before?
I've never taught before, but that's actually something that I've been really wanting to get into, especially this year. I think this year more than anything is like the year that I've actually been like, I think I'm kind of like ready, because I was actually talking to Bill Robertson after I finished that museum project, and
Yeah.
he saw my marble work, and he's like, if you
Yes.
are going to teach a class, he's like, you need to teach people how to do that. He's
You
like, you
need
can
to
do a
teach people how to
marble.
do that. Let's talk offline about how to make that happen, because you could do
Yeah.
the teaching and I could just get people to your class. So we'll talk.
Yes.
Um,
Oh, I love
all right.
it.
So, yeah. So on that, I mean, I think you do need to share your knowledge, because that's the only way it's going to work in this mini world. So, because we are so small, no fun, no pun intended.
No pun intended.
So this is awesome. I can't wait to see you at the show. I can't wait to see the pieces behind you in person and live. Thank you so much for talking to me today
Thank
and
you.
sharing with
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
And we can't wait to see you in Chicago.
Yes, I can't wait. It's going to be
All
so
right.
much fun and only like 4 weeks away.
I know. Oh, only 4 weeks. Yeah.
Just
All
4 weeks.